Welcome to the scientific method. Today's objective, students will be able to list the steps of the scientific method. Okay, so let's take a look at the steps of the scientific method. We start off with observation, we move to a hypothesis, we experiment, we collect data, we make a conclusion, and then we retest. So what is observation? Observations are data that are gathered through your senses, whether or not it's your sense of smell, your sense of touch, perhaps it is your sense of taste, whatever you hear or whatever you see. These are our observations. Now on to a hypothesis. As you know, a hypothesis is an educated guess, a suggested solution to a problem. It must be testable, and sometimes it needs to be written down and it predicts a certain outcome. So with your experiment, you need a procedure. The procedure needs to be very precise. It needs to be written down. It needs to be step by step so that you can actually repeat the experiment over and over again. Within the experiment, you're going to have a variable. This is going to be a factor within the experiment that's going to be tested. Now, in order to have a valid experiment, you're only going to test one variable at a time. If you test more than one variable, you're not going to know what's making the change within the experiment. An experimenter changes one factor and observes or measures what happens. They change one factor at a time. One variable will be changed at a time in order to observe and measure. Now, we also have what's called the control variables. The experimenter is going to make a special effort to keep all factors constant other than the one variable that they're going to change. Okay? This is very, very important in order to have a valid experiment. So, what's the purpose of a control? The controls are not being tested. The controls are what are staying constant. Okay? Controls are used for comparisons. We are only going to change one variable at a time. So the factor that's going to be changed is known as the independent variable. So whatever factor you're going to be changing within the experiment is the independent variable. And the factor that's being measured or observed is called the dependent variable. Okay, so the way I remember it is that the dependent variable is dependent upon the independent variable that you are changing. So let's take a look at an example. Suppose you want to figure out what type of fish food grows the largest fish. You're going to try several different types of fish food and measure the growth of your goldfish. So what are your variables within your experiment? Varying the food is going to be your independent variable. What you're going to change is your independent variable. That's going to be the type of the food. The growth of the fish is going to be the dependent variable. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable, and the growth of the fish is the dependent variable. So, as far as your variables go, what's the control variable? Well, one of them is going to be you need to keep the same type of fish in both containers. Along with the same type of fish, you also need the exact same environment, the same size bowl, the same type of water, the same type of rocks, the same temperature. And one more thing, it's best to make several trials with each independent variable. That's right, you need to do it over and over and over again. The more data, the better. Now, as far as data, the results of the experiment can be one of two or both. It can be quantitative and it can be qualitative. You can write down a discussion as far as what you observed, and you also need to write down numbers. You need to have measurable numbers for your data. And the data also needs to be organized. It needs to be organized into charts, tables, and graphs. Why? Why charts, tables, and graphs? It makes it so that whoever is taking a look at your experiment, whoever's looking at the data, it can be easily discerned. It can actually be looked at, and they can make a conclusion more quickly by taking a look at charts and graphs than if they have to sit down and actually read it. Okay, and finally, we have the answer to the hypothesis based on the data that's obtained from the experiment, and that's our conclusion. And of course, that's written in a paragraph, at least a paragraph form. And you might think we're finished. We're not finished. To verify the results, that's right, the experiment needs to be tested and retested over and over again. The more data, the better. So to summarize, identify the problem, state observations about the problem, form a hypothesis, design an experiment, collect the data, make the conclusion, and then finally retest. So that was a lot of information. If you need to, please rewind the video, watch it again, and then take your quiz.